Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. The Chevy Bolt, which I just bought, is under investigation for a handful of fires. David Murray, the 8-bit guy, also drives a Bolt, and he is my guest. David, I got an email from Chevy concerning... It's not a recall at this point. Really what I got was an email from Chevy saying, hey, there have been some fires. The National Highway Traffic Safety, whatever, is looking into it. For now, Chevy is working hard to figure out what's going on. So for now, put your bolts, all your bolts, basically at this point. They didn't mention 2020 though. Put them into Hilltop Reserve mode because it seems that these fires are happening when you charge fully. Did you get that email yet, David?
Yeah, I got it just a little bit ago, as a matter of fact.
So are you worried about that at all?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not worried at all, but I'm not worried very much.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we hardly ever charge our Bolt to 100%. We usually leave it at 75 or 80% for daily driving. We put it on 100% the night before we go out on a long trip, which is like, 2 or 3 times a year that we would do that.
Right.
So it's not a huge concern for us. And even, to be honest, even if we set it at 90, I doubt seriously it would impact our ability to take trips in the car.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do have concern though. I mean, I'm like, well, people obviously paid money for, the range that they got.
Right.
In our case, it was 238. The newer models are a little more, but, it's kind of like the Volkswagen Dieselgate thing. I mean, where they're fixed to fix the emissions, kills the performance of the engine,
right,
which is what people paid for. So
right,
what are they going to do?
And not to get too off topic, but the Dieselgate thing, I've had Volkswagen TDIs and I've loved them. Before EV, they got amazing gas mileage. And I was always kind of scratching my head. And I know there's scientific reasons and everything, but I always kind of scratched my head at the fix for Volkswagen Dieselgate was to make the engines burn more fuel, to make them less efficient, to reduce the gas mileage. And I always kind of thought that was funny. Hey, the fix is that you burn more oil. And I always found that to be kind of fascinating the way that worked out. But you're saying it pollutes too much, so the fix is to burn more diesel? I don't understand, but I'm not a chemical engineer. But it is interesting. The end result of Dieselgate was this basically a buyback program where Volkswagen gave top dollar, if not full price, for these affected vehicles. And to my knowledge, in recent memory, that might be the precedent that Chevy at least looks at. I'm not going to say that they're going to buy back all these Bolts, but what other precedent do we have? Because what you said, we paid for that 100% capacity. We paid for the 238, and now I'm only going to get 210, whatever. It's still an excellent value. But at the end of the day, it's not what I paid for. So the only other precedent that I can think of would be the Ford C-Max Energy issue. Because I think it was also the C-Max Hybrid, because they didn't get the fuel economy that they were initially promised. They had to lower the fuel economy on it later. And of course, what did they do? They just sent all the owners checks for I think it was $500 or $600 or something like that to compensate them for the misadvertisement, basically. Right. And so that's the only other precedent I can think of. What about Nissan in the Leaf? Did they do anything about those batteries?
They never really did anything. No.
Yeah. So it's kind of part of what makes this so interesting is that EVs, as far as mass market EVs like the Bolt and Tesla and Leaf and everything, we are still pretty, all things considered, early on in this technology. Yeah. So everything we're doing right now is setting a precedent for the future. And I'm with you. Back to the range thing is I only drive about 31 miles total every day. So I'm not making excuses for Chevy. They have their hands more full than I do. But going to 90% capacity right now for me, just like you, isn't a big deal. And I feel perfectly safe, as you mentioned, if I need to take a long road trip, charging to 100% capacity. We need to remember here, because it will be sensationalized, mark my words, there'll at least be news stories and things blowing this way out of proportion. It's something like 3 or 4, like a handful of bolts have caught fire while charging, and that will get it. That's very sensational. Like I talked to you on Facebook about, it's going to generate clicks. That's what the public perception is going to be. It's going to be a publicity nightmare for Chevy. People who are still anti-EV are going to say, see, well, EVs are a death trap. But the reality is ICE vehicles catch fire way more often than EVs do, simply because there's more of them, I guess.
I would like to give you a personal anecdote on that.
Sure.
So you might not have been really watching the scene back then, but we got one of the first Chevy Volts, with a V as in Victor.
Right.
And back in 2011, I think is when we bought it. And there was still a lot of sensationalism going around in the news because there was this issue where a Chevy Volt had caught fire in the lab, and there was another one that had caught fire after a crash test because of it was actually ruled to be due to improper handling with the for example, like with the gas car, they drain all the gas out of it before they do the crash tests,
right?
But with the Volt, they were, according to GM, they were supposed to drain the gas and discharge the battery, and they did not discharge the battery,
right?
And so like they crashed the car and then they stuck it out in a parking lot. Like a day or two later, it caught on fire. And there's a whole interesting scientific reason why that happened. But anyway, this went like absolutely, front page news on every EV hating type, news system out there, and on social media and everything, talking about how EVs are death traps. And this went on for years and years. And I actually had people, more than one occasion, come up to me in a parking lot after seeing me park my Volt and ask me, aren't you concerned about driving this car? They're very well known to catch on fire.
Yeah.
How do you park it outside? Are you afraid to park it in your garage?
Yeah.
And I would tell these people, I'm like, you know what? There was the two cars that caught on fire. Up to this point, no customer-owned Volts have ever caught on fire. And this was like 3 years into Volt ownership.
Right.
I was having to explain this to people.
Yeah.
I'm like, there has never ever been a documented case of a customer owned Volt catching fire.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, the public perception is going to be that EVs are death traps because they catch on fire and whatever. Because yes, you're right. Every time an EV catches on fire, it is front page news. But there is one interesting thing to note about that. Because we know this behavior of wanting these sensational headlines, it also helps us keep count of how many Volt fires there's been. Yeah. Because every time there has been one, I've seen it posted on the news. And I think there's only been like 2 or 3.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. My guest today is the 8-bit guy, David Murray from YouTube. Both he and I own Chevy Bolts, and a handful of Chevy Bolts have caught fire, prompting an investigation, and we both got an email from Chevy today. A handful of bolts. Is this actually a big deal? Let's continue. So Elon Musk, I forget when this was, a year and a half ago or so, there was a headline, Tesla catches fire in a parking garage, and it was sensational. Oh, EVs are death traps and everything like that. And Elon Musk basically replied with the amount of ICE vehicles in the same amount of time that have burst into flames and caught fire. And it's like, so one EV today out of however many hundreds of thousands of EVs, just Teslas alone are out there, caught fire under some very rare, extreme, fluke circumstance versus how many people catch their cars on fire at a gas station like every day. It's there. So it's not saying that, obviously no one's saying that EV battery packs are inherently safe things. I mean, you have energy density, there is capacity for things to go wrong, but there is equal, if not more so, and arguably more so, capacity for things to go wrong when you're actively handling flammable fluids going in and out of your car, bursting out of the fuel tank when you're in a crash. It's all dangerous. And the fact at the end of the day is, even I guess you could say per capita, per 100,000 units, there are more ICE fires per 1,000, ICE being internal combustion engine, more internal combustion engine fires per 100,000 units than there are EV fires per 100,000 units. And yes, it's sensational and it's scary, and bolts are, it makes it sound like Chevy bolts are just popping like popcorn, around the country, just bursting into flames. Couple that with you can go on YouTube and it's awesome to see. I mean, it's scary, but it's scary awesome to see how lithium battery packs do burn. It's quite ferocious and horrifying, but it is fascinating. Just tell that to somebody whose vape exploded in their pocket. It's not fun for them, but handled appropriately, just charging normally and going about your day, the odds of it happening to your Bolt or to my Bolt or anybody's EV across the board is so astronomically low. Like, you'd have a better chance of winning the lottery, not $1 million, but maybe winning $5. All I'm saying, it's a low. The odds are low. At the end of the day, I am not too worried about it. And like I told you on Facebook, and this is really wishful thinking, and it would be bad for Chevy, but part of me's thinking I wouldn't turn down if the recall was, hey, bring it into the Chevy dealership and we'll put in the new 66 kilowatt hour battery to replace your 60 kilowatt and I'll get extra range. That's bad news bears financially for Chevy, but I'm thinking if that's the deal, then sure, I'll take it and get the extra range.
I'm sure you'd be happy with that, but I think we can look at Nissan as a precedent for that. I mean, because once they had the huge battery scandal with their Leafs, with the degradation in hot climates, they basically did nothing to compensate anybody whose battery loss was more than expected.
Yeah,
and because those batteries are expensive, and that would be it'd practically put them out of business to have to replace all those batteries. So I think if they do anything at all, it would probably be what we discussed earlier. There would either be some kind of small financial compensation,
right,
or it would be a buyback offer. I think that's most likely, because then they could just resell the car after they've coated it for 90% of battery capacity.
And go on. I'm sorry.
I remember what I was going to say earlier.
Sure.
I will admit, when it comes to EV battery fires, because you were talking about lithium battery fires, I will admit, while they are less common than internal combustion engine fires, they are more difficult to put out.
Oh yeah,
and that is definitely a concern.
They can burn for days.
when they do catch fire, it is definitely not good.
Right. I read because there was a case that kind of spurred this investigation, or kind of forced the issue. It was a few days ago, maybe a few weeks ago. A Bolt caught fire at a charger, and the fire department was there all night trying to put the fire out, and the plume of smoke that this thing put out, darkened the sky. And the fire department's final solution for putting the fire out is they brought in a big tank of water, and they lifted the thing up on a crane and dumped it in the big pool of water, basically. And it just sat in the water for another prolonged period of time to make sure that the battery didn't continue to burn.
I don't even think it is fire. I could be wrong, but I don't even think it is fire in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more like at Chernobyl. You have like this smoldering. Well, in this case, it's an atomic reaction, but in the case of the Bolt, it's more like a chemical reaction. I don't even think oxygen is required for those battery fires. Once they get started, I think it's. I don't think water or lack of oxygen is going to put the fire out. It's gonna go until it's done.
It's
kind
of
no energy left.
Kind of like an oxidizer type thing. It's got its own propellant built in. Whatever keeps the reaction going is built into the battery chemistry.
Yeah, like thermite or something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's not going to go out until it's expended all of its energy. So,
right. It's and I'm curious. I'm gonna double check that what the reaction is going on in lithium, because I'm not a chemical engineer. I'm not a physicist. I don't know exactly, but you're right. The type of burning or combustion that's happening within an EV battery pack, or your cell phone, Galaxy Note 7s and the 1850 or 13850 cells that are in your flashlights and things. It's more or less, give or take, the same type of chemistry. It depends on phosphate, or if it's iron phosphate or lithium ion or polymer, whatever. But there's still, the combustion of it all is different, and it's kind of a more of a slow, kind of prolonged exhaustion of the fuel, I guess. Yeah.
And of course, I also have to wonder about who actually does foot the bill. Like when you when your car manufacturer buys a part from a third-party vendor to put into their car, and that part is bad. I mean, you just say it's just a radio or a seat or some other part. Who foots the bill if that goes back for a warranty or recall repair?
Yeah.
Who foots the bill? Is it the supplier or the auto manufacturer?
I don't know. You're right.
In this case, LG Chem is the battery manufacturer.
Right.
The batteries apparently are the problem.
Right.
So is it LG Chem that's actually going to have to foot the bill, or GM?
Right. I would imagine, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know all the bureaucracy of it, but I would imagine if Chevy said, hey, we've got some problems with your batteries, you're going to have to kind of subsidize this process a little bit, because we went into this deal with you in good faith that the product you provided us to put in our vehicles was safe. And then maybe LG will say, well, it is safe. There's the margin of, are the 4 or 5 vehicles that have caught fire within that kind of margin agreed upon in whatever contract they work out with Chevy? I don't know. And really, part of me thinks that it's not going to boil down to, hey, we're going to give everybody a new 66 kilowatt hour battery pack. I don't think it's going to come down to that. Honestly, I'm leaning towards, if I was going to bet money, that they could probably solve this with a software update. If they don't solve it with a software update, kind of change the characteristics of the charging, maybe, I'd be surprised if a software fix can't fix it. But then again, like you said, if it's really impurities in the battery, it's going to be a heck of a software update to compensate for that. But what do you think the final fix is going to be if you were to take a shot in the dark?
Well, I don't know, but if I had to, my best guess would be that they will probably limit the battery capacity some. It may not end up being to 90. It might be like a 95 or something like that as the final fix. If they can figure out at exactly what point the danger is in the charging cycle.
Right.
And then for those customers that are just, pissed off about it, they're just going to either have to do a buyback or offer them some kind of cash incentive, like Ford had to do.
Right.
So that'd be my guess.
Yeah, that would be my guess too. After the software, I mean, it could be a combination of both. Hey, the safest we could get these, legally speaking, is to get it. You have 99%. We're going to pay you or do some sort of compensation for that last 1%. Or they could just say, hey, this falls within the realm of battery degradation anyways. Got to take a break in the conversation right there. Be sure to visit geektherapyradio.com and let me know what you're geek about. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. My guest is David Murray, the 8-Bit Guy. Let's wrap up the conversation on the Bolt and then move on. Bottom line, the last point I want to get to is we're not going to know anything about what Chevy plans to do for Bolt owners regarding this issue until, as per my email, the beginning of 2021. So in a few months, maybe by January, February, we might have some sort of fix. I would imagine Chevy is going not back to the drawing board, but they're testing these battery packs to, ad nauseum to their limits to see if they can replicate these problems. But again, it's such a rare. That's what I want to stress. It's such a rare occurrence that Chevy and LG may test these packs for months, putting through thousands of tests and still not be able to replicate the fire. And what do they do at that point? Like, well, we tested and then we couldn't find a problem. Maybe it was the chargers. Maybe it was a defect with the level 2s or whatever that these people were sitting at.
Yeah, it's possible the level 2 charging system was overcharging the batteries. Like maybe it wasn't stopping at 100% or whatever, and it just overcharged them until they caught on fire.
Right.
In which case a software update could fix that.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not sure that they know yet, although it is interesting that they have not identified the 2020 model as being at risk. So it tends to suggest to me that they know there's some difference.
Right.
Because the 2020 model does have a different battery pack.
Right.
So.
And I think that's it. And who knows, down the line, something might come out with the 2020. We don't know. To end this conversation, to wrap it up, people, I don't think it's appropriate to be bringing out the pitchforks against EVs right now. While, yes, you want to keep LG and Chevy accountable, and I do, I am not one to use 4 battery fires out of however many hundreds of thousands of bolts came here. It was like 250,000, 250,000, something like that. 4 out of a few 100,000 is not enough for me to abandon the technology. If we did that, then we would have never discovered the new world. We would have never got out in the ocean, because we would have taken our dinghy out there. And if we had 100,000 little boats out there and then 2 of them sank, and we just, all right, exploration is off. We're done. Same thing with space exploration, even with Challenger. I listened to Ronald Reagan's address after the Challenger explosion, and he's basically said, we've never lost a crew in flight, but this doesn't mean that anything's going to stop as far as NASA or space exploration, because the future belongs to the brave and such. So while there's a handful of EV fires, this doesn't mean that the technology is inherently flawed. We will press forward, and this is not the nail in the coffin for EVs. And despite the sensationalism, I'm really not that worried about it.
Yeah, it'll pass. People have very short memories too.
Yeah.
Just like the Volt fires, I bet you most people probably totally forgot about them. That they, the only reason I remember is because I owned one and I was subject to interrogation about it all the time. But yeah, I think the general public's completely forgot about it. And yeah, I see Volts out on the road every day, all the time.
Are you worried about your Volt catching fire? Like, dude, I'm just trying to buy some kitty litter. Can I just go home? So, to wrap up, do you have any announcements, or what's going on with the Dream Computer, or any other projects you got going on?
Well, the big project I've got going on right now, the 2 big projects I've got going on right now, is the studio build, which I'm still about 95% done with the building, and I plan to start working on the interior soon. But the other really big project is my video game that I've been working on, which is really, really close to completion now.
Yeah.
Called Attack of the Petsky Robots, and I'm very, very proud of this one. It's I think it's my masterpiece. I mean, compared to the other video games I've released. Cool. In the past, I'm really ecstatic about this one. What kind of time frame on that do you think before release to the public? Well, the game itself is actually done on all the 3 initial release platforms, which is the Commodore PET, the VIC-20, and the C64. Cool. And except for the sound and music routines are still being worked on. And I've actually got somebody else working on that. So all the levels are complete. The manual is almost done. The box art's almost done. I mean, so I'm going to be going into production with the manuals and the boxes here in the next few weeks. And then hopefully the sound and music routines will be done within the month. And the game will be done and start shipping.
So, and that is wonderful. I've got a couple YouTube comments, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, even though I know the answers. Probably what I suspected is. Anyways, Planet X. Why am I blanking out? The X3. Mm-hmm. I kind of jokingly mentioned, like a year and a half ago or whenever we talked about it, is Planet X3 ever coming to Sega Genesis, or make a Sega Genesis ROM? And I halfway jokingly asked that, but then there were some comments like, dude, that would be awesome if it came to Sega Genesis, and follow-up questions. Is there any update? Is it coming to Sega? Are there any plans for Planet X3 to be ported to any more systems, I'll just say, let alone the Sega, but more systems?
So there was actually a port in progress to Sega from a fairly competent programmer, but I think it got abandoned. There were some early demo videos of it that kind of were leaked out onto YouTube, but I don't know whatever happened. The trouble is, I have had probably 100 people ask for the source code for Planet X3 because they want to port it to another system, and in each case I've given it to them, and basically nothing ever happens. I think a lot of people vastly underestimate the amount of work necessary to port a game like that to a different platform. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's easy today. I mean, like porting a game from Mac to PC or something like that. Because everything's written in C, and there's this huge abstraction layers between everything. So the game code ports fairly simply. But when you start talking about these machines made in the 80s, in many cases, porting something from like the Sega Genesis, it's a complete rewrite. Right. All you're really going to be able to save are like the maps and maybe some of the graphics, and you could look at the code for a kind of inspiration on how it was made. But ultimately, it's a complete rewrite from the ground up. That's why I've never created ports for it. I was kind of lucky with Attack of the Petsky Robots, the one I'm working on now, because of course it is written for Commodore systems, so there's a lot of reusability from one Commodore system to the next.
Right.
But yeah, when you write it for like the 8088 for an IBM PC or MS-DOS machine, there's just not really a lot else you could port that to, because every other computer of the era uses a different processor.
Yeah.
And it's written in assembly language, so you can't just reuse any of the code. So
at the end of the day, when it comes to X3, at least, for example, unless one of the 100 people or whatever who asked for the source code actually does something with it, then it's probably not. You're not going to find it on your local Sega Genesis anytime soon.
No, I don't think so.
What about the Dream Computer?
Well, that has kind of stalled out. We're making excellent progress for a while, and then we made a new board and I think we got this board manufactured about 3-4 months ago. Mm-hmm. And it had it was going to be the final board, right? We added all the new features that everybody had been asking for and that we thought were good features to put in there. Right. And then we kind of locked it all down. We got the board manufactured. We got 10 of them made. We populated them, and they don't boot. And me and Kevin have spent countless hours trying to figure out what is wrong with them. They just simply do not boot. So one of the things I've done, for example, is I've sat there and written little assembly programs. We actually hooked up a little character LCD to one of them. Cool. And I wrote little programs in 6502 language, and we would burn the ROMs, stick the ROMs in the board, boot them up, and we would test like various bits of the board using these custom little programs. It seems like everything was working. Like I would test the RAM, and then I would have it display some kind of little message on the LCD screen, the little character LCD to say that, how much RAM was tested and was good and all that. It all checked out okay. So it's like the board is working, there's a heartbeat, the CPU is working, but for some bizarre reason we just can't figure out. It just doesn't boot to BASIC, and we're kind of stuck there right now. Okay. We've actually sent the board prototypes off to some other people that are currently looking it over to see if there's something we missed. Right. Kevin thinks it's some kind of timing issue, but he can't narrow down what it would be. So anyway, at this point, there just isn't any news on it, and I don't know. We may have to just kind of backtrack and go back to a simpler board design, because I think what we did, and it was probably a mistake, is we added too many features at one time, because we had a working board design, and then we added like 7 new things to it. And so probably one of those 7 things that we added is the problem. And if we'd added them one at a time and done different board revisions in between, we'd probably been able to catch, like, hey, this broke it. Like, we added this thing and it broke it, But I think because we added so many features in one revision that I just don't think we're going to be able to figure out what caused it to break. So we might have to just kind of go back to a simpler board design and start going forward again one step at a time. I haven't checked the what's the Facebook page called again for the Dream Computer? What is it? It's just called the Commander X16 prototype or something like that. Yeah,
Commander X16. So has there been much activity on there recently? I haven't checked in the last few weeks.
There's people still writing code with the emulator and whatnot, and see, that's kind of one of our dilemmas that we've got now. Because if it weren't for all this code that people have written, we could just say, oh, well, you know what? We'll just change the design into to something different. Mm-hmm. Until we get it working. But now we've got this problem that will break compatibility with all of this code that all these enthusiastic people have been coding with the emulator. Right. And so we're kind of stuck trying to get the current design to work. But yeah, other than that, just people posting like games and code and demos and stuff they're writing. Mm-hmm. There's not been a huge amount of activity there.
Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Final segment with David Murray, the 8-Bit Guy, coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator. Have you ever been working on a project that's just going too smoothly, like suspiciously smoothly? Well, that's where we pick up the conversation here with David Murray, the 8-Bit Guy. Honestly, I would be surprised if I asked that question and say, where we are with Commander X16, and you said, oh, everything's going great, it's fluid, and if everything's going so perfect. When things go too perfectly with projects, that's when I get really, really suspicious. Like, okay, what bolt did I forget to put in that's going to make this whole thing collapse? Or what bit of code is omitted that's going to basically have this thing dead on arrival? So it sounds weird to ask this question, really weird to ask this question. but is it kind of sort of a relief that you are facing an issue because it means that you are on the right path to make sure that the product is great? I mean, is there some relief, or is it just great for you when things just go perfectly the whole way through?
Well, obviously, I'd rather go perfectly the whole way through, but I tell you what, booting a computer up to a black screen is one of the more difficult things to solve. I've always said that when you're troubleshooting something, it's much better if you can reproduce the error every time and it's something visible on the screen so that you can narrow down exactly what it is. But yeah, when a computer just flat out doesn't boot, there's like 100 different things that could be the problem.
Right.
And this is not the kind of problem I would hope to have to try to deal with, because it's the most difficult one to solve. And
did you? And you've gone over, I'm sure, with the voltmeter and test all the cotton. Like, is it a cold solder on a RAM chip or something like that?
No, we've got several prototype boards. They all do the exact same thing.
Interesting.
And yeah, we've been over all the connections, and like I said, we got third parties looking at it now, and they've been over all the connections, and it's, like I said, the board works. I mean, from a perspective, like, I can write code on an EEPROM, stick it in there. That code will execute, but the actual kernel, which is obviously considerably more complex than just a piece of test code, will not boot. And it's actually kind of really difficult to figure out where the problem is coming from that.
Man, do you think it's going to be, at the end of the day, something just so simple, like just like a duh moment type of thing, or do you think it's tending to?
It probably is. It's very similar when I've in my game development, there have been bugs that I have encountered that have been absolutely infuriating and have taken sometimes weeks to track them down. And then, of course, once I finally find them, it's just like, a hand to, your forehead. You're like, why did I not see that? Like,
right. It's like before. It'd be like writing a basic, and correct me if I'm wrong, writing a basic code like go to 90, but you never put a code, 90 in there. So it just kind of stops or something like that. Maybe it's something, I don't know. I don't know if that kind of helps spur some sort of idea, because you never know. One of the things about problem solving that I simultaneously love and hate is that inspiration to fix a problem can come from the most ridiculous, out of nowhere ideas. So, I mean, it could be something as complex as writing the kernel for a new computer, but you could be out in the Kroger or H-E-B or something like that and hear a little kid say, "Mommy, can I get this Hot Wheels track?" And she says, we don't have enough money for track. Or I don't know. You could hear somebody say something so completely not having anything to do with your problem, but it spurs something. It kind of triggers this reaction. I was working on something recently, and I want to see if you have any experience with this kind of thing. I was changing the radiator fans on the DeLorean a few months ago before I had my baby, and I was thinking, there's no way I'm gonna have time to just lay under a car for 5 minutes for 5 hours once the baby comes. So I changed the radiators out, and there is, on the internet, there's really no good tutorial for changing the radiators on a DeLorean. And I know a lot of people listening might think, well, it's a rare, obscure car, of course there's not a whole lot of manuals. No, there's a ton of stuff about working on DeLoreans. It's a huge community, classic cars. But the only thing that we had to work with, or I had to work with, about changing the radiator fans on the DeLorean was a shop write-up. Maybe the guy at DMC typed it up on the toilet on his phone or something, just real quick in 5 minutes. He said, what is it? The paragraph, there was a line in a paragraph. It said, "With some dexterity, you'll be able to reach this bolt." That's how it went. With some dexterity, you'll be able to reach it. I'm just like, with some dexterity is basically you leaving out 3 paragraphs explaining exactly how to get to this bolt. So I put it down, I stepped away from the problem. I stepped away from the project for 10 or 20 minutes, and I went and sat out on the back patio. I was talking to my wife. She's pregnant and everything, and I'm sitting there sweating and cussing, I can't get this freaking bolt out. And the only thing that the service manual says about this is with some dexterity. And so the fix came. My eureka moment for that problem, which was my albatross, the bane of my existence that weekend, was I changed the word in my mind from dexterity to ingenuity. I said, okay, with some ingenuity, you'll be able to access this bolt. And just changing that word in my brain from dexterity to ingenuity meant, oh, okay, if I use these, like, a couple different tools, I'll be able to get the bolt out. And that's exactly what happened. Do you have any sort of experience like that where, you step away from the problem and you have a eureka moment and then you come back to it and fix it?
Yeah, I have. I can't think of a specific example at the moment, but I definitely know I've encountered that. But, I was sitting here thinking, you want to hear a more funny story. Mm-hmm. The beta testing thing is always something that, to me, is just kind of insane. I experienced this with Planet X3, and I've experienced it again with my latest game, which is, I'll be coding this thing for 6-7 months, and I'm just playing it by myself. And eventually, at some point, I have to bring somebody else in to play the game. Right. And and so I read an analogy on the internet somewhere the other day, and I might not get this analogy exactly correct, but it's pretty close. And imagine this group of engineers, and they're designing an Android like bartender, right? He's going to mix drinks for people. Yeah. And they have this group of software engineers, and they're coding all the software, and they they code all these different types of drinks that the Android would know how to mix, and every possible thing a customer could ever possibly order, it'll know how to make. And so they put it out for beta testing. First customer that comes in asks where the bathroom is. And, of course, it breaks the Android because it was a totally unexpected thing that just, the programmers never foresaw something as simple as that. Right. And so that's what happens to me with these games. I'll be coding these games and see, I know how the game is supposed to play. So I just play the game exactly like, in my mind, I've seen that, other people would play it. Right. So I'll bring a beta tester in and I'll sit down and watch them play it. And they just start doing all kinds of crazy things. I'm like, oh, I would have never thought to do that. Yeah. And then it breaks. Like, all these things will break. When I did Planet X3, I had the kid next door, who's like a 12-year-old kid, come over and play it. And I had a notepad there, and I was just expecting to just, make notes about, like, oh, maybe this is too hard, or maybe, maybe I need to make this a little bit easier stuff. But he did all kinds of crazy stuff that I would have never thought. And I found like 10 bugs within like the first 10 minutes. And he literally broke the code like 10 times trying to do things that just never occurred to me that anybody would even try to do. And so the same thing happens with the latest game I'm working on as well. I had some beta testers, and I'm just sitting there like hitting myself in the head like, why did it never occur to me that someone would try to do that, in the game? So that's why beta testing is definitely very, very handy. Fortunately, I've fixed all those bugs now.
And that's why no matter what you're working on, whatever project we're working on, we always need a fresh set of eyes or set of ears, because they're going to see and hear things differently than we do because we get too close to the project. And it's a very valuable tool. Like, the most valuable tool we can have is another person's perspective. Yep. David, thank you so much for coming on Geek Therapy Radio again.
You're welcome.
Listeners, do me a favor and subscribe to the 8-Bit Guy on YouTube if you haven't already. And speaking of subscribing to things, I do more than just this radio show. I upload podcasts all throughout the week. So subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast app. Just look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's my show. We're all geeks about something. Embrace your inner geek. You are worthy of love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. Take care. If you own a business and want to get the word out about your business and sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, go check out geektherapyradio.com and let's talk turkey. It's more reasonable than you might think.